Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
With LinkedIn Jobs, we tap into a network of more than 1 billion professionals to help you find quality professionals quickly and easily for any role you need. Marketing wizards? Found them.
Software engineers?
Found. That project manager I could never seem to hire? And found. LinkedIn Jobs quickly matches your roles with candidates with the right skills and experience. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your first job for free and get started at linkedin.com/spoken. That's linkedin.com/spoken. Terms and conditions apply.
Want flexibility? Take yoga. Want flexibility with your health insurance? Check out United Healthcare Insurance Plans. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer flexible, budget-friendly medical, dental, and vision coverage that may be right for you. More at uh1.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all my social media at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. So I'm going to start with a review that I got in the last few days, actually. And this was left on Apple Podcasts USA by Monique. And it's a 5-star review. And Monique says, "Thank you for your brutal honesty. Thank you for all your honesty and vulnerability with all of us. I really appreciate that you have included other types of professionals that shed more light on living with hoarding/OCD. I'm so thankful that you get into all the nitty-gritty details of all the complicated feelings that we go through with dealing with emotions and our stuff. I am the grandchild and child of hoarders, and I struggle with stuff also. Your podcast is a much looked forward to time for me, and I re-listen to episodes to really get the message and tools into my head. I am rooting for you to come to peace with your stuff and love to hear your progress. Keep up all the great work." Monique, thank you. That's lovely to hear. I'm glad you appreciate the input of the professionals. They have a really important body of knowledge between them, and it's great to get those specialists in. I'm also glad that you like that I talk about the weird, complicated feelings, because it is weird and complicated, isn't it? I'm sorry to hear that you're struggling with this, but I'm glad you have found the podcast. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about breaking bad habits. I don't know about you, but I have plenty of bad habits that I could do with breaking. And I've done episodes before with Dr. Jan Eppingstall on creating new habits and on tiny habits and micro movements. I will link to those in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. But I think breaking bad habits, there are definitely similarities with creating new habits, but also some different ways of looking at it as well. And in terms of hoarding, those bad habits might be things like acquiring. We might have a bad habit of every time we donate a bag of clothes at the charity shop, we come home with more clothes that we buy there. Or we might have a bad habit of going onto eBay late at night and buying all kinds of nonsense. So definitely acquiring can be a bad habit within hoarding. But there are also bad habits like leaving dishes unwashed, or bad habits like leaving the house without taking a bag or two to the bin. My bad habits span from hoarding and acquiring related ones to, all kinds of things. Procrastination, putting things off when I'm intimidated, not replying to texts immediately, or, to be honest, replying either immediately or a week later. There seems to be no in between. If I don't do it straight away, there's a high chance I won't do it at all. So I either do it straight away or I remember a week later. Lots of bad habits in my life. I used to smoke, which is probably one of the worst habits. And I feel like quitting smoking was something I never thought I'd be able to do, and I did. And knowing that I've quit something so damaging but so addictive, physiologically as well as psychologically, does sometimes encourage me, because I think, if I can quit that, maybe I can also quit going on Etsy after a sleeping pill. Sleeping pills for me are quite dangerous for random online purchasing. The one I take is called Zolpidem, which is more widely known as, what is it? It's the pill that Roseanne Barr blamed racism on. She went on Twitter and said some racist stuff and then said Ambien, that's the international, well, certainly that's the American brand name, and said that she wasn't racist, it was that she'd taken an Ambien. And I have to say that when I take Zolpidem, I can do weird things, but it doesn't make me racist. So I think that's quite spurious. But certainly I think that's the equivalent of some people might get drunk and do random purchases or that kind of thing. So plenty of bad habits I need to look at in my life. And so I thought I was doing a lot of reading about breaking bad habits for myself, and I thought doing an episode here based on what I'd learned and what's worked for me in the past as well might be a good thing to talk about. So one way to try and break a bad habit is to make it more difficult to carry out that habit. So the idea of this comes from the opposite. It comes from the idea, if you want to create a habit, you have to make it as easy and frictionless as possible to incorporate that habit into your life. And so making it harder or increasing friction to break a habit does make a lot of sense. So when I stopped smoking, I didn't dare throw out my smoking stuff, my tobacco and lighters and all of that. You're meant to, that's what all the advice says, but I couldn't. But what I did do, I kept enough for like a couple of cigarettes, and then I hid it. And I knew where it was, but it was really difficult to get to deliberately. So that if I got to a point where I thought, I need a cigarette, I forget quitting, I need a cigarette, it would just put one extra step between me and the automatic behavior of sparking up. It just added a bit of friction to the process. And so if I did get to that point where I had said, forget it, I'm going to start again, if the cigarettes had been right by me, that would have been very easy. Whereas the process of getting hold of the things I made deliberately onerous so that it might just trip me up. And similarly, I installed a Chrome extension. Chrome is the web browser I use, and you can install extensions that add features to the Chrome browser. And I installed an extension that you could tell it websites to block, and it would not let you visit those websites. And so I put into this extension a list of my most dangerous online shopping websites. For me, that's eBay, Etsy, a couple of clothes stores, that kind of thing. And TK Maxx. I don't know why it's TK Maxx here and TJ Maxx in America. And I don't know if it exists elsewhere and which it is there. But TK Maxx for me was a dangerous one because there's a lot there to look at. A lot of it's pretty cool and it's also very reduced in price. And so all of those things are, for me, danger zones where online shopping is concerned. So I put in these websites into the extension. Now, this isn't impossible to get around. I knew how to get around it even when I installed it. I'm reasonably tech savvy. But what it did was just introduce friction. I couldn't just type Etsy.com into my browser. I had to go first through the process of bypassing the extension. I will link to the Chrome extension, by the way, in the show notes. It's free. It's called Leech Block. There are a number of them available. That was the one I chose. And it's not that it made it impossible. It's that it put one extra step. It reduced the automatic behavior. If I automatically went there, it would stop that happening. And then I would have to do a few little things to get around it. And it's not that it's flawless. It's that it just made it a little bit more difficult. And sometimes interrupting the process like that is enough to stop you from doing something you might do otherwise. Another example of this is, I know people who are hooked on, say, Twitter or Instagram or something like that, and they feel like they can't quite control their own behavior when they're on it. They use it too much, but they can't stop themselves from using it too much. And so I know people who will remove the Twitter app from their phone. Now, like the website blocker, this doesn't make it impossible to access Twitter. They can still open the browser on their phone, or they can use it on their computer, or they can reinstall Twitter, but it just introduces one interruption, one extra step that makes it that bit harder. And they might pick up their phone automatically to go to Twitter, remember it's not there, and then think, can I be bothered to use it on the web app, which isn't very good? No, I can't. And it just introduces that step. I heard an interview on a podcast yesterday with Greta Thunberg, who says that nearly all of the time she has her phone on airplane mode, because otherwise she gets just too many notifications, and then turns it off airplane mode when she wants to use it, or every few days to check social media, which is not something I could do, but seems eminently sensible, let's face it. But if there's one thing we know about Greta Thunberg, it's that she is eminently sensible and also very funny. She's got this kind of public perception of being a bit robotic and single-minded, but she was really funny on this podcast. I will link to that in the show notes as well. It's a podcast that I recommend, I would say, called How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. And she talks to sometimes well-known people, sometimes very successful people who aren't as well-known, looking at times in their life they failed and what they learnt from it. And I think it's a really interesting premise because as somebody who feels very bad if I fail, I like that openness of discussing failure as something normal and something that's not a disaster, even if it feels like a disaster in the moment. So as well as making it a bit more difficult to do something, another way that's very related actually to break bad habits is to make it easier to do the alternative, to make it easier to do the opposite of your bad habit. So if you want to replace your bad habit with something, say instead of leaving the house without a bag to put in the bin, you want to leave the house with a bag to put in the bin, then make sure there's always a bag or two of rubbish ready to go in the hallway near the front door. Don't block your hallway. It's important for safety reasons that you can get in and out of your home as easily as possible. But put the bag of rubbish by your shoes, maybe. Something you know you will go to before you leave the house. So as well as putting obstacles in the way of your bad habit, try and smooth the way to a better habit you want to replace it with. Another good thing to do is to make a real effort to spot when you're doing your bad habit, to take notice of the fact that you're doing it, because often we do this stuff almost unconsciously. A while ago, I went to the dentist and she said, "Do you bite down on your tongue ever?" And I do. I bite down on the right side of my tongue. And she said I had like this mark on my tongue that normally means that somebody regularly bites down on it, but it can mean something else. So she needed to take a biopsy from this mark on my tongue, knowing it was almost certainly just that I was biting down, but you know, she was just checking. So she took a biopsy, which is less dramatic than it sounds. It just involved taking a little bit off and then stitching up my tongue afterwards. And it turns out there's nothing that makes you aware of how often you bite down on your tongue, like having stitches in the exact spot you bite down on. I had no idea until then just how often I did indeed bite down on that bit of my tongue. And it trained me right out of it within a couple of days. You quickly stop biting down when it really hurts to bite down. So by the time my tongue had healed from the biopsy, I'd stopped doing it because you learn really quickly if it causes pain. And for reference, the biopsy was fine. It was just that I was biting down. Now, I'm not suggesting doing something to cause yourself pain, but I am suggesting trying to be as conscious as you can of your bad habits. Even if you still do them, make a mental note and be aware of what you're doing. Don't just let yourself do these things without paying attention. Even if it doesn't always stop you, I think you need to be fully aware of what you're dealing with, and sometimes we're not, especially because a lot of these bad habits are really ingrained. We've been doing them for years and years and years. And just like, you know, sometimes you have a packet of biscuits, cookies, biscuits next to you, and then you look down at the packet of biscuits and there are none left and you don't remember eating any of them, and yet you have. And there are other times you eat a biscuit and it's the tastiest thing you've ever tasted, and you're really, really mindful of the fact that you're eating a biscuit. It's like that. Sometimes you have the most perfect cup of tea that you've ever drunk. Every mouthful is like a warm hug to your insides, and it makes you feel really all well with the world. And other times you pick your mug up and the tea's already gone and you don't remember drinking any of it. Being more mindful of what we're doing, including the bad habits, helps us to get a picture of what we're honestly doing, what the scale of the problem is. Because we do live our lives, a lot of our lives, on autopilot, don't we? There's a road I have to drive up quite often, and it's usually double parked, and so if a car is coming down the hill, then the car at the bottom of the hill has to wait until it's gone before it goes up the hill, and vice versa. So I got to the bottom of the hill the other day and I saw a car coming down, so I stopped, and it was only after it had passed me that I noticed that whereas it was normally fully parked on both sides, because this was after hours and nobody was at work, it wasn't double parked, and I could have driven right up alongside the car driving down. But I'm so used to stopping at the bottom of that hill if something is coming down it that I did out of autopilot when there was no necessity. Trying to be more mindful in our day-to-day lives is nearly always a good idea, but especially with bad habits, maybe jot it down in a notebook or on an app. Maybe just make a mental note and say, okay, there, I did it again. and try not to be too judgy with yourself, especially during a kind of initial period of just trying to get the lay of the land and trying to assess how often you're doing a particular bad habit. Let it happen to some degree without yelling at yourself. Become more aware, but without that layer of berating yourself.
A lot can happen in the next 3 years. Like a chatbot may be your new best friend. But what won't change? Needing health insurance. United Healthcare Tri-Term Medical Plans are available for these changing times. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer budget-friendly, flexible coverage for people who are in between jobs or missed open enrollment. The plans last nearly 3 years in some states, with access to a nationwide network of doctors and hospitals. So for whatever tomorrow brings, United Healthcare Tri-Term Medical Plans may be for you. Learn more at uh1.com.
Hey there, it's Michelle Norris. I'm host of a podcast called Your Mama's Kitchen. When I travel, I'm usually looking for a way to find a taste of home when I'm not at home. And one of the things I love to do when I am at home is entertain. And Airbnb allows me to do that. When I was in California recently, I rented a house that had a great kitchen. And when we were sitting around the table, we were all thinking, we're in someone else's house. Someone could be in all of our homes as well. If you have a home, but you're not always at home, you have an Airbnb. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host.
Another really useful way to deal with bad habits is to say to yourself, okay, you can do that thing, but only if you do this other thing first. An example of where this works really well is if you're craving some quite unhealthy food, but you also know that you're just really hungry because you haven't eaten today and you skipped lunch, and you really, really, really want to just eat a whole cake. That's the kind of occasion where you can say to yourself, okay, you can have cake, that's fine, but only after you've eaten this roast vegetable pasta or whatever. And then you have the pasta and your blood sugar goes, oh yeah, okay, I don't need to panic and get a whole cake inside me now. I might have a slice of the cake, or I might not even need that anymore. Delaying, whether that's by putting something in place or just delaying, can be really helpful. I feel even weird saying used to, even though it's been a long time, but I certainly had a big issue with self-harm when I was younger. I used to self-harm. And the way I'm hesitating to say stopped because that gets in the way of the way I do it. But basically, the way I went from self-harming relentlessly to now rarely, to the point that I can't remember when I last did it, was a long process and a slow process, but it was effective over time. And what I started to do was, if I got the urge to do it, I would say to myself, okay, you can, but only in 30 seconds. And I would force myself to wait 30 seconds and then allow myself to do it. And when it got to the point where I could do that reasonably easily, then I would say, when I got the urge, okay, you can, but in a minute, and then 2 minutes, and then 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes. And once I got to, and this all took a long time, this isn't something you do in a few weeks or a few months, but when I got to the stage where I was able to say to myself, okay, you can self-harm, but in an hour, then I noticed that if I left it that kind of length of time, then by the time an hour had passed, so had the urge a lot of the time. And so I would really, really want to self-harm, and I would say, okay, you can, but at 7 o'clock. And then I would busy myself for an hour trying to just wait it out. And then 7 o'clock would come and I wouldn't even notice, even though the initial 6 o'clock point had been very much a countdown. I would realize it was 7:15 and I was fine and I didn't have the urge anymore. And I hadn't even noticed 7 o'clock come and go. And it got to the point where I could say, when I got the urge, okay, you can, but later. And I didn't specify the time. And I would feel reassured. It was very important to me that I always had permission to do it. I always had permission to do it. It was never you can't. I had tried so many times to stop self-harming by saying you can't. And it never worked. It never worked. Whereas saying you can, but in a bit, meant I didn't feel like it was banned. I didn't feel like I could never do it again, and that felt like something I couldn't cope with. I can, but in a bit. And then it would get to the point where I would say, okay, you can, but later. And it would be days before I did it again, or before I got the urge again. And then it would be weeks and months. And that's why I don't say, or I struggle to say, I used to self-harm, because I still, 20 years later, need that permission to be there. I need to know that I can. I think this is why I kept a couple of cigarettes when I stopped smoking. I needed to know that I could, even if I wasn't planning to. And those are big habits to try and get under control. And of course, they're more than habits. They're coping mechanisms. They're the way we get through the world. They served a really important purpose at some point in our lives, both self-harm and smoking. Self-harm isn't just a destructive thing. Self-harm is a way of managing your feelings and your emotions, and it's important to recognize it as that. But the thing is, so is hoarding. It's the same. Going online and buying a load of stuff you don't need is a way of managing emotions and feelings that feel unmanageable, whether that's anxiety, whether that's trauma, whether that is insecurity, whether it's all of those things and more. When we can't get rid of something, or when we bring things in, that's serving a purpose, even if to everybody outside of us it looks ridiculous and it doesn't make any sense. There's something within us that feels like it's a solution, even if it's in reality a massively maladaptive one that has destructive consequences. Now, you could say that about hoarding. You could say that about self-harm. You could say that about smoking. It's true for all of them. So delaying or doing something else first. Okay, I can buy a new pair of scissors, but only when I have looked in every room of the house. Okay, I can keep hold of this letter, but only when I've chosen 3 other letters that can go in the recycling. If you're like me and the kind of person where still having permission to do something is important for your sense of control or for your sense of not panicking, then delaying and or doing something else first can be a really good thing to look at for breaking bad habits. Another thing to keep in mind when you're trying to break a bad habit is to remind yourself of why you're trying to break that bad habit. It's easy to say, oh, but I really, really want that new cushion. It's a beautiful colour and it looks so comfortable. Surely just one cushion is fine. That's the time to say to yourself, okay, but why is it you're trying to stop bringing things in? Look at the bigger picture. Look beyond that beautiful turquoise cushion and say to yourself, okay, but why are you trying to stop doing this? Trying to stop bringing things in because that means even more has to go out. That might be one reason. You're trying to stop bringing things in because your partner will be really infuriated if another parcel arrives. You're trying to stop bringing things in because you look around and you don't have space for 75% of what you've already got. Just taking a moment and saying, yeah, I really, really want the thing, or I really, really want to keep hold of this, but what am I trying to do? What's the bigger picture? What will serve my long-term goals? Will this cushion take me to where I want to be in life? Chances are it won't. And I'm a fan of cushions. Not the ones on the bed that you have to move before getting into bed and then put back on when you get out of bed. That is a ridiculous routine that nobody needs to do. But I kind of like that whole mismatched maximalism cluttercore thing. I talked about cluttercore in a previous episode. I will link to that in the show notes as well. I do like that thing of your cushions are all a bit different and different colours and different styles, but only in a home that is under some control. If you're trying to implement that kind of look in an already hoarded home, it does not work. It does not take you to where you want to be. Another idea to try and introduce is to set limits. Okay, I can do this thing, but only once a month. I can do an Amazon delivery once a month. That's it. Or I can keep 3 cushions, but the others have to go. Whatever, it really depends on your circumstances, but there are limits and we can control what we do to some degree, because the other danger that I think a lot of hoarders have in common is all or nothing thinking. And that doesn't always work in life. That's not always how things go. It's not always a helpful or productive way to approach the world. And so sometimes what you need to do is say, yes, but within limits. I can go shopping. I can go to the supermarket because I need food, but I can only buy one extraneous thing. I can't come out with a basket full of every knick-knack that looked cute and was reduced in price. If you go into a charity shop, you have to leave with less than you donated. Put limits. Also, remove temptation at the source. We can have all the best intentions in the world to never go onto the TK Maxx website again. But if we're still getting weekly emails from TK Maxx telling us about all the bargains they've got, especially these days when a lot of promotional emails are tailored to you. I don't know about TK Maxx, but certainly Amazon, the things that Amazon emails me about are based on things I've already bought. They certainly sometimes send wild ideas, but often it's tailored towards what you've already bought. It's very, very carefully done based on the things it knows you're interested in. So it doesn't send me recommendations for, I don't know, car upholstery for trucks, because I've never bought anything for a truck. But it does send me recommendations for books that are similar to books I've already bought. So if you get tempted by promotional emails, unsubscribe from them. If you get tempted by a particular item in stores, avoid that aisle in the store. Whatever leads you quite often down the path of the habit you want to get rid of, if you can get rid of whatever it is that leads you there, you stand a much better chance of avoiding the habit altogether. Just like if you're vegetarian, then you just don't go down the meat aisle in the supermarket. It's not a dilemma. You just know there's nothing there for you, so you don't go down there. Similarly, if you're trying to avoid buying cushions, don't go to the bit of the shop that sells cushions. You know, especially if you've been doing the mindful thing I suggested earlier and trying to be conscious, you know where your downfall is. So take proactive steps to avoid the thing that trips that switch in your brain from rational person to person who needs their 17th cushion. And finally, address what you get from the bad habit. It gives you something. Do you feel safe when you buy something? Do you feel reassured? Do you feel relaxed? Does not taking rubbish out of the house make you feel in control? Does it make you feel like you don't have to make difficult decisions? Work out what's going on. What purpose is your bad habit serving for you deeply, emotionally, psychologically. And when you've identified that, look at other ways you can get that. If buying 6 more bags of pasta to add to the 36 bags of pasta you've got at home makes you feel reassured that you're not going to go hungry, then see if there are other ways you can reassure yourself of that. Maybe by counting the bags you've already got. Maybe by making yourself look in your food cupboards, every food cupboard, look at it all before you go shopping. That might also be able to reassure you that you're not going to go hungry without you having to buy more. If you are avoiding getting rid of a particular thing because you feel anxious that you might need it, then have a look, especially if you've been putting like with like, have a look at all the other versions of that thing you've already got. And that might reassure yourself that you're not going to wake up in 6 months' time really wanting that thing and not having it. If you feel very, very stressed and doing your bad habit makes you feel relaxed, look at other ways to relax. For some people that might be going swimming. For other people that might be having a massage. For someone else that might be having a hot bath or doing meditation or going for a walk in the countryside. If you can work out what you're gaining from your bad habit and then find other ways to gain that same thing, that will really reduce the power of the bad habit. So I hope some of those are really useful for those of you who, like me, struggle with bad habits. I think most humans do. I don't think you have to be a hoarder to have bad habits. It's just that our bad habits are particularly entrenched and, can be dangerous. Let me know if you have any success with these ideas or if you have any other really good ways of breaking bad habits. We all need to learn as much as we can. In just 1 second, I'll give you my top tip of the week. In the meantime, please do subscribe to the podcast, review it, 5 stars would be amazing, and share it with your friends or anyone who might be interested or who might benefit from it. It all really helps. To find more ways to support the website, the podcast, and my overall de-hoarding project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Now, back to your top tip. So my top tip today is a little clip from the No Stupid Questions podcast, which I will link to in the show notes. And it's talking about something called the status quo bias. So have a listen.
Why is it that, as they say, we yearn for change but cling to the familiar? That's a popular expression among some therapists. But the idea rings true to me, which is that people, myself included, yearn for the novel, new adventure, but we do cling childlike to what we already know and love. I think in part it's because change always includes risk. And that is why there is this thing called status quo bias, that we're more likely to stick with the chicken salad sandwich that we always have for lunch than to try that newfangled Reuben that you've been hearing so much about.
And then if you, for some reason, have to try the Reuben because somehow the chicken salad exploded, you'll probably eat the Reuben every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah. But I do think there is status quo bias. For example, pre-pandemic, if you teach a class, they kind of take an arbitrary seat at the beginning.
Right.
And then you just gravitate back to that as if it's something special and holy. And I think it's in part because you at least know that that seat works for you.
No, I think that's really interesting because we do get stuck in doing things in a certain way. We get stuck in a rut maybe, and we feel safe in repeating familiar things in familiar ways. But why? I think it's really worth having a think. If we do something in a certain way because we've always done it in that way, that seems like a prime opportunity to challenge that and have a go at doing it differently. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @thathoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with that Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support, and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.